Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel, or hi if you're new here, I'm Jade, and it is time for July's wrap-up. If you don't already know me, then I love doing wrap-up videos because I just love sort of summarizing my reading month, reflecting on it for myself, for other people. I love watching other people's wrap-ups and just seeing what they thought of everything that they have picked up. So once again, this month, I have read 9 books, which just seems to be the number a lot this year, I must say. I don't know why, that just seems to be how it always comes out. So overall, it's been a very strong month, I would say. So let's get on with it and I can share with you what I have read. So the first book I read was Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I actually had 2 book clubs pick this as their pick for July, so that was quite convenient, I must say. I have read several Taylor Jenkins Reid books in the past and I've loved all of them, so my expectations of this were quite high, I must say. And also, I wouldn't say I'm like typically someone that's going to reach for like a novel about space and like, you know, being an astronaut and things like that. So I was a little bit apprehensive with this one, but as you can see from my rating, I ended up loving it. So in this book, we follow a character called Joan who is like really obsessed with space and fascinated by it. And she, encouraged by her sister, decides to apply for NASA. And she actually gets in and is therefore one of the first ever women that has been employed to work for NASA and like potentially become an astronaut. There are a few different people in her program. She's not the only woman, and there's obviously a couple of men. But yeah, they really want to, you know, get up into space eventually. Obviously, there's lots of training, etc. But that's the general premise of the story. However, it is definitely not like a purely like space-based story. There is like a romance subplot. There's also a lot about family dynamics and, you know, the difficulties that can arise within your own family and loyalty and things like that. So I personally really enjoyed this book because you kind of got to see Joan's relationship with her sister and how complicated that is, and then her relationship with her niece, which I adored, to be honest. It's hard to say too much about relationships and things in this book without giving much away, so I'm not going to talk too much, but what I will say is because the book's set in the 80s, it's very relevant to things that play out and the difficulties that the characters sort of experience. So I kind of like that aspect. If you've read any Taylor Jenkins Reid before, but you were put off by the space topic, don't be. Go read this. And I mean, even if you haven't read any of her books, I highly recommend it. So the next book that I moved on to was one that was chosen by my TBR jar, and that is The Wishing Quilt by Jodi Thomas, Laurie Wilde, and Patience Griffin. So essentially, this book contains 3 short stories, and they're all essentially romances, and they also all have like things to do with quilts and quilting in them and grandmothers. So it's a little bit unique the way it's put together, I think. So in the first short story, which is called Secret Wish, we have a character called Avery, and she is taking over her late grandmother's quilting store. So we find out it's been closed for a long time. It's set in a very like small town where, you know, everyone knows each other, that kind of vibe. And then she meets the sheriff, and I guess then some drama and romance stuff ensues. Because they're only short stories, there's not a lot I can say about the plots without just like telling you the whole thing. So it's going to be a little vague, I think. But I was sucked into this first one so strongly, but I have to say that there were just certain like words and terms that the main male character would use that just gave me the ick. At first I was like, oh, maybe this is like set really old fashioned and everything, but then I realized it definitely wasn't, and it just didn't work for me. Some of the terms he was using and things. I don't want to say anything and give stuff away, but yeah. So I was a little at the end of the first story. Like I really liked the concept, but I didn't love the main male character. So yeah. So the second story, Wish Upon a Wedding, is focused around a character called Ellie. It's her sister's wedding, and when she turns up to the venue of the wedding, which is like a ranch type place, basically her childhood love just happens to work there, and they kind of rekindle a little bit, or, you know, potentially can rekindle. So it's kind of like a lost love kind of theme, I guess, and about working things out in the present. I thought this one was quite cute. There were some like silly moments in it, but I I thought it was a cute little story. And then the final story was called When You Wish Upon a Quilt. And it was about a girl called Paige who goes to like an international quilting competition, I think. I did not know that was a thing. I mean, maybe it isn't, but it's a thing in the book. But anyway, while she's there, she meets this rather handsome cowboy, and it goes from there, okay? I don't really need to say much more. So as you can see, I gave it 3 stars because I enjoyed reading it, but it's definitely nothing special, nothing like overly memorable. I do think, with short stories, that to really make them very memorable can be very difficult, but I think as they go, they're quite cute, easy reads. And if you just want something like easy to pick up, I don't think this is a bad choice. But yeah, for me, nothing like overly memorable. Then the third book of the month was First Time Caller by B.K. Borison. I know this was super popular when it came out, and I saw quite a few people talking about it. I ended up with it. If you didn't see my haul video that this was part of, I ended up getting it because my friend asked me to get her a copy of the special Walmart cover and mail it to the UK. And I didn't really think much of it at the time, but then I went back in a long time after and there was just like 1 copy left there. And I'd seen so many people talking about it since then. I was like, I'm just going to buy it. I feel like it's fate. It's mine. So this was another one chosen by my TBR jar. And honestly, I did really enjoy it. So this novel follows Lucy and her daughter, I think it's Maya, or maybe pronounce it Maya, but I think it would be Maya. Her daughter Maya calls into a radio station who do like a sort of like dating hotline kind of thing. And so Lucy's love life, or lack of, kind of gets publicized. And because her daughter called in and then Lucy ends up being like a really sweet person, it kind of just blows up and everyone's really invested in Lucy's love life. So Lucy obviously gets invited to the radio show and she meets the host, Aiden, and everyone who runs the radio. And she ends up sort of co-hosting, I guess, like almost like a dating thing for herself. And she gets set up on dates and you kind of go through this whole dating experience. Well, inevitably she does end up falling in love with someone. It's a little cliche, obviously, but I think as cute romances go, I feel like this storyline was quite unique for me. The only thing that made me not give it a 5-star was there was a lot of, when characters are like, oh no, we're not good for each other, we shouldn't be together, and it goes on and on about that, and you're like, their reasons are so stupid. So there was a bit of that in there, and that's why I can't give it 5 stars, because that bit just annoyed me that little bit too much. But I'm giving it a solid 4.5 because I think it makes for a very cute, good romance book. And as I said, the actual storyline itself, pretty unique, I think. So the next book that I ended up reading was The Night in the Moth by Rachel Gillig. This was, in fact, a book club pick, one of the many book clubs that I'm now in. So yeah, I was debating whether to read this. I really wanted to, but I'd been kind of putting it off, thinking I should read One Dark Window first, that duology, because I hadn't read any Rachel Gillig. But as this was chosen by my book club, I just went ahead and read it. So I am still yet to read the duology, but if you saw my TBR jar and followers choices for me, I have actually got One Dark Window on August's TBR. But as you can probably tell, I love this one, so I'm looking forward to that one. So this book starts off with a group of girls who are called diviners, and we're kind of led to believe they kind of work for the gods, and essentially they dream of omens, which is kind of like a fortune telling type thing. It sort of predicts someone's fate, and they will do that for certain people. And these girls have these I basically being drowned. I know that probably sounds super bizarre. It's a very, very unique concept and story, in my opinion. I really, really loved it. But anyway, after we find that out, the main catalyst of the story, I guess, is that a lot of the diviners start disappearing, and we follow one called 6. They're just named after numbers, and number 6 is worried because they're all disappearing, and she actually leaves the kind of home that they're in, and she decides to go and try and find them. She then enlists a prince's help, who in turn sort of enlists her own help, and yeah, he has a knight, hence the knight in the title. That is a huge part of the story. And yeah, there's a lot of twists and complications, and she has a lot of moments of realization of truths. So yeah, I can't say too much without giving the plot away, but honestly, if you like your fantasy, give this a read if you haven't already, because I think it's fabulous. Also, there is a side character of a gargoyle, and he is amazing. He's so funny. The best character. just by far, I loved the gargoyle. I will say I did sort of see the twist at the end coming, but it didn't detract from the story for me. Like, I still loved it. So as I said, if you like fantasy, go give this a read, because yeah, great 5-star read for me. Also, this book is shockingly heavy. When I bought it at Barnes and Noble, the woman at the desk was like, wow, that's really heavy. I was like, yeah, I don't know why. It feels like, honestly, it's like a weight. Like, I could do weightlifting with this. So then, driven by some very nice weather days, I then reached for Abby Jimenez's Yours Truly, because I do kind of like reading a good romance when it's nice weather. I'm not going to lie, I quite like romance in summer. So I reached for Abby Jimenez's Yours Truly because I read Part of Your World earlier this year, and I kind of want to finish this trilogy, and I really want to get to Just for the Summer before the summer's over. So I decided this one had to be in my July's TBR. So this book follows two doctors, Brianna and Jacob, and they are sort of like work promotion rivals at first, and there's a bit of miscommunication. Long story short, it ends up with Brianna fake dating Jacob to try and persuade his family that he's moved on from his ex. And I guess you could say both characters are quite stuck in the past and hung up on past relationships, so it leads to a bit of a complex story. So yes, it is the stereotypical fake dating trope. I must say, I'm not like super bored of it yet, but I haven't read that many books with it in. And I do know that a lot of people get bored of it. It probably is quite overdone if you've happened to pick up a lot of them. But honestly, like, the Love Hypothesis this year was kind of the first one, I think, that I'd really picked up this year. And so, yeah, I'm not bored of that trope, but I totally get if you are, you might not be the biggest fan of this book. So what I will say is the reason I gave it 4.5 is, even though I loved the story, I do slightly prefer Part of Your World. Part of Your World I gave 5 stars, so I felt like this needed a little bit of differentiation, so I gave it 4.5. Also, the miscommunication trope in this is a little strong for me. Like, I don't know, I'm not the hugest fan, and it can just be a bit too much when they're constantly not understanding each other. It just sometimes seems a bit silly to me. I don't know. However, I still really love the characters in this book, and I could really see myself in Jacob, our main male character, because he has terrible anxiety, and there were some lines about things that help him and about how he needs to know where to park, how he needs to know the layouts and stuff in advance. That is me. Sadly, that is me. That's how anxious I get, and I will not go somewhere if I haven't scoped out the parking first. It's just a given. So yeah, a solid romance read again for me, that I really enjoyed. Okay, my next read is this book with a very long title called The Entirely True Story of the Fantastical Mesmerist Nora Gray. And this is by Kathleen Kaufman, and I got this as an ARC, but at my time of filming this, it has just released. It released a few days ago. So definitely check this out if you like your historical fiction with a bit of magical realism, because as you can see, I gave it 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed this one. For me, there is nothing better than when a random arc really surprises me and I really enjoy it. So this book essentially follows two people, and one of them is Nora, and she is a young girl at the beginning of the book who pretends to be psychic and can like fake having kind of possessions and things. She's really good at sort of faking communicating with the dead, and she does this to earn money for her and her dad, who's a little bit of a waste of space, I'm not gonna lie. She does this, so they can survive, basically. It actually just becomes very, very real over time. And then we also follow Lottie, who is a young woman whose husband has just tragically passed away, and she's pregnant and she doesn't know what to do, and she's pushing her husband's old workplace because that's how he died, at work. She's pushing them for a payout. She's refused. She gets angry. She loses her temper and basically ended up locked into an asylum. I can't say too much more about the stories. Of course, both characters' paths will cross in some way or other at some point, but I can't say too much more without giving things away. I will say the plot isn't the most action-packed thing, but there's something about the way it's written and my investment in the characters that just made me adore the book. It is set in the late 1800s/early 1900s, so it has a very like classic air to the book, I guess you could say. But as I said, the characters are just so good. So yes, if you like historical fiction and you want a little bit of magical realism, go for it. Okay, next I picked up Elphie by Gregory Maguire. I've wanted to read this ever since I bought it, and I kept thinking, no, I should read the other books in the Wicked series first. There are 4, if you didn't know. I was like, I should read those first. They came out years ago, and obviously Wicked the musical was based on that book, but I I just really, really wanted to read this. So I decided to anyway. And as you can probably tell from my rating, I was so hugely disappointed. The book is beautiful though, I will say. But for me, it just didn't really work. So what I'm going to start off with is the way this is written. The style is just not for me. It's in the present tense, which I don't mind occasionally, but I would say it's not my favorite. And for this one, I just didn't feel it was necessary. And this is very like active, omniscient narration. And I would have liked something more focused on Elphie, really getting to know her as a character. But I kind of felt, yes, I learned little bits of her backstory, but the plot was quite lacking to me. And yeah, because I just wasn't really vibing with the way it was written, honestly, I was bored for most of this book. I gave it 2 star because I don't think it's poorly written. I just don't think it's for me. And there was the odd scene that I quite liked. There'd be like the odd endearing moment or something I learned about her that I did enjoy, but overall it's just a huge, huge disappointment. And honestly, I can't really summarize the plot because to me it just was quite lackluster. But I guess you could say that they go in search of Elphie's real father, and you see her grow up a little bit. I will say, when I don't enjoy a book, I really do read other people's reviews. I mean, I do sometimes on other books anyway, but I really do if I don't like something. And I did read a couple of reviews that said this isn't the best if you haven't read the other books, that the other books kind of set it up better. I don't know how much truth there is in that, but if there is, maybe that's why I didn't like this one. So I will still go back and give the other books in the Wicked universe a try at some point, but for now I think I'm all Wicked out. Does that make sense? That was a bad way to phrase it. And now it's time for my thriller of the month, which, you know, I don't lean towards thrillers so much in the summer, but my TBR jar picked this, and I'm actually really glad because if you can't tell, I really enjoyed this one. Eeny Meeny by MJ Aldridge follows D.I. Helen Grace. It is a series, but obviously this is the only book I've read. I feel like you might be able to read them as standalones. I'm not really sure. And I'm not like rushed to get the next one because I feel they are their own separate entities, but obviously I do want to continue. But yes, we follow D.I. Helen Grace, and you know, she's trying to solve a string of murders, and her colleagues are now looking into a serial killer. We see the perspective sometimes of the victims, which I find really, really interesting. There was lots of like twists and turns in the plot as they were trying to solve the cases, and I just loved how it was written. It's very, very fast paced. There's also very short chapters. And so it is a very easy read, but it's like, it just absorbed me completely. You know, it feels like a very British Frida McFadden. Like the way it's written, with how easy and accessible it is, but how like gripping the stories tend to be. I was debating whether I should give this 5 star or not, but honestly, the amount that I loved it and didn't want to put it down, for me, made it worth that 5 star rating. So yeah, if you like your thrillers and you haven't tried this, give it a go. As I said, it is British. It's very British. So if you're not into like British novels, maybe not, because yeah, British police system, and there's definitely references to some British stores and stuff in there, I'm pretty sure. But I loved it. And then my final book of the month, as we've had a very, very sunny, hot week overall recently, I picked a final romance because I do, as I mentioned, love my summer romances. And I picked up Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. So I've been really excited to read this since I read The Love Hypothesis earlier this year, because I love that book. And loads of people say this is their favorite Ali Hazelwood. I've heard a lot of people say that. So I was like, yes, I should read it. What I didn't realize, there is a second book in this trilogy, which is in between, which I didn't know, but I Googled and it said it would be fine to read this as a standalone, which was totally correct. Thank God. So yeah, I read it and, as you can see, really loved it. So in this book, we follow Elsie, who is essentially a struggling scientist. She lives with her housemate, like her best friend, and they're struggling a little bit. So they both act as people that fake date. And they do it as sort of like a side career. Obviously, it's not their dream thing to be doing that on the side, but Elsie, as a scientist, has like a role which doesn't pay very well currently. She's not long out of university, and you know, she takes what she can get, and you know, essentially they both need more money to live. Elsie has actually applied for a better job. We know she's very, very talented in her field of science, and she's been given this like running chance to go to MIT to work. So essentially, Elsie is looking for a better job within the science realm so she can put this like fake dating side hustle to an end. But unfortunately, when she goes to this new job, someone that already works there and will be part of the decision-making process is in fact but ultimately, a lot of the story is about her and this one other person going for this new job and whether she's going to get the role and her attempting to get the role. Yeah, essentially, romance, trying to get a job, science. They're kind of like the summary terms of this book. I will say, as soon as I started reading it and I read that she fake dates, I was like, oh God, she's going to fall in love with this guy she's fake dating. And I thought it might be a bit of a repeat of the love hypothesis. And I was like, that would really disappoint me. But I was so relieved to see that the fake dating thing, you know, she didn't actually fall for the guy she was fake dating. And it all just had like twists and turns. And so it ended up so good. I just adored all the characters in this. I thought they were all brilliantly written. So I had to give it 5 stars again, because for a cheesy romance book, you get what you want out of that, you know? So it deserves that 5-star rating. And that is everything I read in July. So I hope you liked hearing about my thoughts and feelings on all of these books. And please let me know if there are any books that you highly recommend that I read anytime soon, especially in the romance genre, actually. Like, I feel like I've really got back into it. I feel like I used to read a lot of romance and I sort of pulled out of reading as many. But now I feel like I'm really getting back into it, I'm not gonna lie. So if you've got any really good romance recommendations or any recommendations, please leave them for me. Let me know if you've read any of these and what your thoughts are. And I will see you again real soon. Bye!